4 minutes, 3 minutes, 3 minutes. So now 3.
Did you guys, since you just joined up, did you get your high holiday prayer books to use? Okay. I was going to say, if you're able to come on Sunday, let me know. If for any reason anybody's not going to be here, tell me, because I think we have some copies that I can grab and give to you guys. So let's, after the service is over, I just want to make sure everybody's as taken care of as reasonably possible. Just make sure this is working. So the only thing is, I don't want to risk the ire of Eileen if I give something away that I wasn't supposed to. But I can also text her and try to find it.
Yeah. Like 17. 14 days. I have to do the math. Yeah, that's 2 weeks. I can count.
First, Michael, great to see you. Good Shabbos. What's the test of how long you've been in a place where you recognize people with masks on? That's the.
Yeah,
it's hard.
It's odd because I had like my first week of classes, and then yesterday was virtual. So we met our teacher. We saw his face for the first time. He's like, "Oh, it's wonderful to see the rest of your faces."
This is, you know.
And like I'm going up and introducing people, like, "Hi, I'm Lauren." They're like, "Oh, okay. I didn't recognize you with the mask."
You know, someday I will have to explain to Emmett like what all this is about. You know,
I'm hoping you have to explain that.
I mean, the thing is, like, again, you know, there's a whole generation of babies who will be born into the world, right, with everybody in the room wearing masks on, and like we have no way of knowing. But he seems like a very well-adjusted kid at the moment. We haven't ruined him yet, but you know, it's one of those things where it's just like looking back on that whole experience is so surreal. But somehow or another, babies just seem to roll with everything. Like it doesn't. If anything, he just thinks it's funny and he tries to pull the mask down. It's very hard to go shopping while holding him and keeping a mask on. It's almost impossible. That's like, you know, Olympics level parenting. So, you know, bronze level, not gold level, but, you know, something along those lines. Anyway, good Shabbos, everybody. It's good to see you. It's good to be here. It's getting real, people. You know, this is the real time. We're only a few days away from the holidays, and while it will again be something of an unusual one in a number of different ways, you know, Lauren is working very hard. I've been working as hard as I am capable of working. And I think we're really going to do something special this year. But it begins tonight, right? It begins with Shabbat, and in particular, the Shabbat right before the high holidays is one for us to really treasure. And in addition to that, in our national calendar, with Labor Day coming up, it's another reminder that this is a holiday that a lot of times we sort of look past. We don't really think or contemplate its historical significance. And in a little bit, I'll share some thoughts on how we might connect a little bit into that. And really try to make this Labor Day weekend not just one in which hopefully we're enjoying and we're with family and eating delicious things and all of that, but also making at least a little bit of space for thinking about its meaning and its purpose. But before we get to any of that, we're going to light and bless our Shabbat candles. So if you have your prayer book handy either here or online, you can grab it and turn to page 120. And page 120, I will do the lighting, Cantor will do the blessing.
It's always the first one. It's like the wax has to melt off.
Don't teach this part in school.
Baruch אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם אשר קידשנו במצוותיו וציוונו להדליק נר של שבת.
Amen. So to begin our service, we'll warm up with Yedid Nefesh on page 128. It's the third reading down from the very top of the page. Again, page 128. Turn now to page 130 as we begin Kabbalat Shabbat together at the very top of the page.
נקמה פניו בתודה בזמירות נריע יא נה נה יא נה יא יא יא
Turn now to page 131, Shirul Adonai, in the middle of the page. We'll turn now to page 132, the last Hebrew paragraph at the bottom of the page.
Simchut tzadikim manona
We turn now to page 134, Samru Ladonai. Turn now to page 135, Romamu, which is the last paragraph in Hebrew in the middle of the page. Turn now to page 138 for Lecha Dodi. A reminder, we'll do the first, second, fifth, and ninth paragraphs, and for the last paragraph, if you so choose, we rise and we face back towards the door that we all walked in through. Lecha Dodi likat kala, B'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likat kala, B'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, B'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, B'nei Shabbat nekabela. Shamor v'zachor v'tibur echad, Yishmianu el hamiuchad, Adonai echad u'shemo echad, L'shemo tiferet v'tila. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, B'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, B'nei Shabbat nekabela. Likrat Shabbat lechu v'nelecha, Ki hi mekor haberacha, Merosh mikedem nesucha, Sof ma'aseh b'machshavat tchila. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, B'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, B'nei Shabbat nekabela. Yitoreri, Ki ba'orem u'mi'uri, שבת יקבלה, לך דודי לקראת כלה, בני שבת נקבלה. בואי ושלום עטרת פנה, גם בשמחה ובצהלה, תוך אמוני עם סגולה. בואי חלה, בואי חלה, לך דודי לקראת כלה, בני שבת יקבלה, לך דודי לקראת כלה, בני שבת יקבלה. Okay, thank you everyone. Please be seated. We'll turn now to page 140, and Cantor will take us away.
צדיק אתה מרי פרח, כארז בלבנון יזכה, שתולים בבית אדוני, בחצרות אלוהינו יפריחו, עוד ינובו בשיבה, תשנים עננים יהיו, להגיד כי ישר אדוני צורי.
We turn now to the Chatzi Kaddish on page 144.
יתקנל ויתקדש שמי רבה,
אמן.
אלמד יברח חירותי וימליך מלכותי,
בחייכון וביומכון ובחייתך בית ישראל, בגללה ובזמן קריב, ויאמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך, לעולם ימי עלמיה יתברך. יתברך וישתבח, יתפאר ויתרומם וינשא, ויתהדר ויתהלל ויתהלל, שמי דקודשה בריחו, לעילא מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, דמירה בעלמא, ויאמרו אמן. We rise and face east for the Baruch Hu on page 146. Please be seated, everybody. We're on page 148. We'll read together in English at the bottom of the page. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who speaks the evening into being, skillfully opens the gates, thoughtfully alters the time and changes the seasons, and arranges the stars in their heavenly courses according to plan. You are creator of day and night, whirling light away from darkness and darkness from light, transforming day into night and distinguishing one from the other. Adonai Tzvaot is your name. Ever-living God, may you reign continually over us into eternity. Blessed are you, Adonai, who brings on evil.
ומעביר יום ומביא לילה, ומבדיל בין יום ובין לילה, אדוני צבאות שמו, אל חי וקיים, תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד, ברוך אתה אדוני,
Baruch Shemo.
המעריב הרבים.
Amen. We're on page 150.
אהבת עולם, בית ישראל, עמך אהבת, עמך Torah u'mitzvot, chukim u'mishpatim, otanu lemadeta, otanu lemadeta. Al-Kain Adonai Eloheinu b'shachbeinu, u'hukeinu nasiach b'kukecha, v'nismach b'divrei Toratecha, u'v'mitzvotecha le'olam va'ed, ki hem chayenu le'orech yameinu, uvahem negei yomam balayla, negei yomam balayla. Me'ahavad al tasir, mimenu le'olamim, baruch ata Adonai, ohev amo Yisrael. Ohev amo Yisrael.
We turn now to page 152 for the Shema.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Please join me on the top of page 154. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם, ושבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך, ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך, וביהי שעריך. למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם, אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים, אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אדוני אלוהיכם אמת. Let's read together in English on the top of page 157. Standing on the parted shores of history, we still believe what we were taught before ever we stood at Sinai's foot, that wherever we go it is eternally Egypt, that there is a better place, a promised land, that the winding way to that promise passes through the wilderness, that there is no way to get from here to there except by joining hands and marching together. As we turn to page 158, Mi Chamocha. Turn now to page 160.
Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom ve'amidenu shomreinu lechayim. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom ve'amidenu shomreinu.
We'll turn now to page 162, Vishamru at the very top of the page.
אותי לעולם.
ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם.
כי 6 ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ.
ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם.
וביום השביעי שבת לי נפש, שבת לי נפש, שבת לי נפש.
ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. You know, the lights flickering is just God saying Lauren's doing a great job, by the way, in case anybody was at all concerned. Or we can ask Richard what actually happened, but we're all good. In a moment, we're going to begin the Amidah together on page 164, and we'll rise in body or spirit and face east. As always, please go at your own pace, and when you're finished, you may be seated. Turn now to page 371 as we prepare to offer our healing prayer. And of course, in addition to the names I'll read in a moment, we'll invite those at home to say names out loud. And of course, we're thinking of both those suffering from the terrible fires on the West Coast and of course, Hurricane Ida in many different places. And we're hoping and praying for healing and speedy recovery for all those affected. In addition to those, we are also remembering in our community tonight Chana Ruth Bat Sarah, Jeff Baker, David Tasher, Jim Cohn, Monique Renee Banks Rathbun, Lindsay Epstein, Dolores Michka, Sylvia Oren, Yerachmiel Ben Hinda, Paloma Chauhan, Samuel Moskowitz, Chaim Leib, Joyce Weinberg, Rick Gold, Stu Pollack, Jane London, Catherine Guarino, Emunah Chava, Judy Stern, Miriam Cornfield, Raz Brody, Chana Ruth Bat Sarah, Bagel Tzipora Bat Elisheva Bat Sarah, Richard Gambino, Michelle Sawicki, Idol Basha Bat Yitzchak, Tzvi Menachem Ben Chaim, Rivka Bat Devora, Amy and Gavin Tucker, Janice Kurz, David Dowling, Israel Ben Yitzchak, Ben Sion Ben Moshe, Lorraine Danis, Buddy Kossoff, Shelley Newmark, David Kyle Klopman, Rivka Bat Rachel, Sarah Bat Chana, Moshe Eliezer Ben Sibia, Peretz Ben Yehuda, Leah Bat Naomi, and Gedalia Ben Leah. And for those that are with us here tonight, we're going to start on this side of the room and work towards the back, and then this side of the room and towards the back. And if you do have names to share, just please raise a hand so I make sure I hit everybody. We'll join now with the cantor on page 371 as she leads us in the Misha Berach in the middle of the page. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Cantor, you can take a little break. Just remember to turn that little doohickey off before you... There you go. And then we'll remember to turn it back on. Good Shabbos, everybody. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the service, certainly within our calendar, we are thinking about the high holidays as they are rapidly approaching. But in our country, we celebrate a really actually a unique kind of holiday, and one that, as I was mentioning before, and certainly I've spoken about in the past, that we tend to overlook and actually in many cases really completely diminish. We all need a day off, and Labor Day certainly is an acknowledgement of the fact that we all need a day off. But it really is also about acknowledging the fact that the idea, the concept of labor, the concept of workers, the concept of individuals and collective rights, the concepts of needing and really having an obligation to take care of those that serve all of us, is embedded into the identity of our country. Maybe not from day one, but really in essence has become a significant part of who we are, or at least who we hope to be, and in many ways actually was the impetus for many different labor movements all around the world to follow in those footsteps. So for years, whenever we've had the opportunity, I'd like to try to highlight in particular the Jewish impact on the labor movement in the United States in particular, which, as you can imagine, is actually really quite outsized. That if you look and study the history of the labor movements in the United States, especially in the late 1800s, early 1900s, Jews are at the forefront in almost every conceivable significant way all across the country. But of course, as happens with time and time passing by, and this not being a subject that quite frankly is often taught in schools or really of much interest to anyone, a lot of these names ultimately fade into history. And that's a shame. And I'm as guilty as the next person. And I realize that every year I purposely sit down and try to find somebody that I had not heard of, and to learn a little bit about them, and then to bring to you a little bit of what I've learned. And so I hope that this will be a meaningful opportunity to learn, but also maybe a spurring everyone to consider taking a next step on your own over the weekend, and to do the same, right? To find somebody perhaps that you didn't know about, and take 10 minutes and read about them, learn about them. So one great resource that you should know is a website and an institution known as the Jewish Women's Archive. So just out of curiosity, how many of you even knew that it existed? Okay, so we're learning already. This is a good sign. Fantastic website, many different resources, has an entire section actually dedicated to the Jewish involvement in the labor unions and the labor movement. And of course, not just highlighting women in this particular case, but highlighting both men and women as well. But in this case, I wanted to focus on a woman, and I wanted to focus on someone who I had never heard of before, and I'm really quite sort of sad with myself that I had. Her name is Clara Lemlich Shabelson. The name sound familiar to anybody? Okay, so again, I think I'm already feeling better about my choice as we're moving forward. And I want to give credit where credit is due. Much of what I'm going to share with you tonight was not my work of finding the biography, but the work of Annalise Orlek, who wrote an article in a larger collection that's known as Jewish Women, a Comprehensive Historical Encyclopedia, which again is a resource I did not know about and I feel like ought to be on my bookshelf. So Clara was born in 1886 in the Ukraine. And like most girls born into that place and that time, she did not receive much of an education. She was taught Yiddish because that was the lingua franca of our people in that place and that time, but essentially received no other training, no other schooling, and certainly no Jewish education beyond the most basic things. And ultimately, she, though, had a drive within herself to learn. And so she wanted to go to the local public schools, and so her parents went, and they learned that the Russians were not allowing Jews to go to those schools. And in a fury, the parents forbade her from learning anything in Russian, from speaking Russian, reading Russian books, any of it. But despite all of that, again, she pushed forward, and she was determined. And so she ended up earning money to buy books, which she learned how to read by herself, by sewing buttonholes on shirts, and also helping women who wanted to write letters to their family who had already moved to the States. Since she was fluent in both writing and reading Yiddish, she helped them to write letters that they were sent over, and they gave her a little bit of money in turn. It was also during this period of time, which, again, for those of you that studied this period of history, will know that labor movements really were starting to pop up in various parts of the world, and in particular in Russia, one of the failed revolutions, right, began with a intention for the people ultimately to rise up in some form or another. And it was a radical time, really actually quite a revolutionary time, and as a result, something of a dangerous time. So as a young person, when she was the most sort of inspired and the most open, she began to come into contact with a lot of these revolutionary ideas and ultimately had quite a profound effect on her. Eventually, the Lemlichs moved to New York City in 1903. And at this point, Clara is 17 years old. And like many women, young women her age, she, of course, begins working. And truth be told, 17 at that point actually is pretty late in getting involved in all manner of production. And in her case, she went into garment work, working in the garment shops. And as soon as she walked in the door, as most of us who have studied that period of history and know, unbelievably poor conditions. I mean, almost unfathomable conditions. And so as a result of it, she realized she couldn't do nothing. She had to stand up and do something, right? So she began organizing the women of this world into something that would become later known as the International Ladies Garment Workers Union. Now, the Garment Workers Union had already existed at that point, but as you can imagine, was dominated by men almost exclusively. And as a result of it, which tends to be our want, we're pushing her away when she kept trying to, get herself involved, and in particular to get women involved. And after, refusing to let down, she organized 2 different strikes, 2 different walkouts of her female colleagues in 1907 and 1909. and by that point demonstrating really the power and really the loss of opportunity that the union would have by not involving women in the movement itself. Right? It almost doubles overnight in terms of its power and its efficacy, and as we'll learn, she, along with many others, become the dominant voices in the movement and pushing it forward. So after months of these strikes, by 1909, she ultimately leads to what is historically apparently one of the great speeches ever given. I'm still trying to find it in its original form. She basically demanded to speak at the Cooper Union in New York City, in downtown New York City, which was at the time really the epicenter of unionizing and of labor work. And she gave a speech that apparently roused the thousands of people, tens of thousands of people there, that led to something called a general strike known as the Uprising of the 20,000. And ultimately speaking, this drove, right, again, this beginnings of a really serious movement led by women predominantly, to draw attention to their conditions, to the realities of their working situation, and ultimately speaking, to push to create both a responsibility on the part of ownership and a change beyond just an individual store here or an individual store there, but really, again, to change the conception of what it means to be a worker in this country and what basic rights are obliged to them. And again, while we may take that for granted and assume that that's a given, in the early 1900s, it could not be further from the truth. If you stood up and challenged your manager, challenged your boss, the chances are you weren't just going to be fired, you were going to be beaten. Okay? It was a very serious thing, especially a young person to take on this kind of role, speaks to the courage that Clara contained within her. Ultimately speaking, and this was again in New York City at that time, not only was the women's movement extremely important, but the Jewish women's movement within it was really, again, at the forefront because the vast majority of women who were working in the Lower East Side factories, a vast majority of them were in fact Jewish or of immigrant status. And so as a result of it, all of this work eventually resulted in several very significant labor strikes, walkouts, and unfortunately, tragedies. And as I think I spoke about many years ago about the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, right? What ultimately results in that, and if you don't know that story, rather than rehashing it now, go online after tonight and read about it. It was one of the most heartbreaking moments, I think, in the history of labor in this country. And unfortunately, these tragedies and much of the work that went to try to prevent them that unfortunately was not realized was the sort of tipping point that, you know, once these stories reached beyond just the shtetl, just beyond the Lower East Side, once it became national news, once cities all over the country began organizing, ultimately change was really ultimately right behind that. She led beyond that and continued to work throughout her life as she progressed through, and her interests and the interests of organizing changed. So while she originally started with the factory workers, with the garment workers, as time went on, she looked beyond that. She got married, she had children, and she began to notice that that there were great inadequacies and great differences between the experience of those who were impoverished and those who were living obviously in a different circumstance, in particular around things like housing, food, public education. Things that, again, we take for granted now, but at the time, these were not the most important things on most political dockets. And she ultimately led a boycott of the kosher meats butcheries in New York City, which I'm sure was probably not an easy thing to handle at the time, mostly because of the rapid rise in prices that were pricing out meat for the average working family. Eventually, she, like many of her colleagues, did get swept up in the early communist movements of the 20s. And so she certainly had that aspect of herself, and as a result of it, she was targeted in many cases. But she moved beyond that. It wasn't really the main focus of her work. What she really focused on, again, was looking for places in which people who are laboring, people who are working, are being treated unfairly. And one place where she went to, which most of us wouldn't think of, really, but actually is incredibly important, in 1929, she created another organization, another group, called the United Council of Working Class Women, and in particular to focus on the unique challenges that faced working class women who were meant to be both parenting and also working, right? And the circumstances that resulted from that without the support that was necessary to help with the various things that ultimately arose. In 1935, it changed its name to the Progressive Women's Councils, and began building a larger coalition with a wide range of other women's organizations all around the country to protest, again, the increasing costs of both food and housing. And with Clara as the president, they ultimately resulted in another boycott that shut down 4,500 of New York City's butchery shops. And again, this is really about the idea of pricing and about affordable food and basic necessities to be felt. Ultimately speaking, she continued to do this work really throughout her life, even up into the point in her 80s. It was in her 80s. She died at 96, but at her 80s, she moved into the Jewish home in Los Angeles. And even in those days, when she was at the Jewish home, she convinced the administration there to honor the grape and lettuce boycott that was being promoted at the time by the United Farm Workers, which was, I think, if I remember correctly, that was like the late 70s, early 80s, right? 80s, 90s. Actually, it's probably a few. What did you say, Jack? Well, so I don't have... I was going to say, Cesar Chavez is the first thing that occurs to me. Right. So that could be the case. So in any case, right, but it shows you the kind of mentality of this woman who grew up with nothing in the Ukraine, comes to this country, could have just been another cog in the wheel, right, but decided that there was something more important, right, that she couldn't just let the things that she saw continue to happen. She couldn't just let the girls, the women who were giving of themselves in every conceivable way to be unseen. And so she did what she could. And I think that her story is certainly unique to her, right? To give credit to her as the individual and the courage of the individual. But every time I read one of these stories and I think about why is it, right, that we as Jews are so involved in these kinds of movements, right? Why are we so concerned with the ideas of things that go beyond the self, but we think about these larger issues that affect entire societies? And obviously I have a certain bias in this that I'm a rabbi, but I spend most of my days reading and studying and thinking about the Torah, thinking about the Talmud, thinking about the history of the Jewish people. And if we think about it truly, right, Shabbat is perhaps the most radical change in the concept of labor rights in the history of the world. Okay, prior to the concept of Shabbat, there is no identified day of rest. There is no idea that a worker deserves the idea of a day of rest. Right? That our experience, for example, as slaves gives us a unique mentality around what it means to have the power taken away from you to live your life. And we all struggle, right? Every one of us, in whatever our profession may be, whether we be the labor, whether we be the ownership, we struggle with the balance between what is right and what is necessary. But if we allow, really, the ultimate selfishness and greed of human beings, if we allowed that to cloud our judgments, cloud our behavior, cloud our perspective, can we imagine what this country would be if we had not had these movements? Can we imagine what our world would look like if the labor movements, especially of the latter part of the 18th century, 19th century, if they didn't exist? If Clara did not exist, to think about the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of women who would have continued to work in conditions that none of us would accept for ourselves, for our loved ones, or for our children. So, as I said, when it comes time on Monday, certainly enjoy yourselves up, Rosh Hashanah, don't forget, service is 7 o'clock. But up until that point, right, have your barbecues, celebrate, do the things that you're going to do, but also just find some space, some time to really be grateful and to be thankful for people like Clara and many, many others who fought battles that many of us have really lived to enjoy and to thrive upon, and to realize that these tasks are not over, right? That this is still a constant struggle here and around the world, and that we as Jews in particular have a role to play. And I think that I feel even more inspired to really consider what my role is and what role I play. And I hope, perhaps in a couple of years, I think Eva's a little bit young to understand this at this point, right? But to make sure that when my daughter gets to an age where she can really understand these concepts and these ideas and this history, to make sure that she is taught it. If the school doesn't teach it, to make sure that we teach our children and our grandchildren these stories. Because if not, as I said, right, here in a room full of brilliant people, and my guess is that if all of our streaming friends were in the room and we asked them, I doubt a single hand would have gone up when I asked if anybody had heard about this woman before. That's not our fault, okay? But at the same time, we do have a certain kind of responsibility not to be passive. So find some way to learn this weekend to savor and to appreciate Labor Day for what it is, and to be proud of the Jewish contribution to this country and to who we are. And with that, I wish you all very much a Shabbat Shalom and a Shana Tova U'Metuka B'Shalom, a sweet and very happy and, we hope, very peaceful New Year. And we'll welcome the cantor back up to the bima as we rise and turn to page 586 at the very bottom of the page, Aleinu L'Shabeach. Aleinu L'Shabeach, Radon HaKol, Latei Kedula Liotzer Breshit, Shelo Asanu Pigoyen Aratzot, Velo Samanu Kemishpekot HaAdama, Shelo Samatel Yukahem, Velo Aleinu Tekol HaMonam, Vanachnu Korim, Umishtakavim Umodim, Lifnei Melech Malchei HaMelachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. V'nehemar v'haya Adonai lemelech al kol haaretz, Vayom hahu, yeh Adonai echad, Ushemo echad. Our thoughts turn to those who have departed this earth, our own loved ones, those whom our friends and neighbors have lost, the martyrs of our people whose graves are unmarked, and those of every race and nation whose lives have been a blessing to humanity. As we remember them, we meditate on the meaning of love and loss, of life and death. I invite those remembering someone or observing yahrzeit to please remain standing. Everyone else may be seated at this time. We think first of those who passed in our community in recent months: Sylvia Alderman, Morris Dickstein, Fred Eber, Sandra Furman, Evelyn Gelb, Lucy Gladstone, Arthur Grossman, Phyllis Katz, Jeanette Kopp, Audrey Lubo, Morty Lynn, Jerry Monroe, Steve Popkin, Danielle Lisa Rigg, Geraldine Rosen, Harriet Roth, Dorothy Shupnick, Paul Silver, Marlise Silverberg, Blanche Sklar, Rita Sandra Snyder, Joan Strong Tangzilius, Virginia Tizer, and Ann Weiss. We also marked the yahrzeits that occurred during the last week for Francis Arrowsworth, Joseph Auerbach, Reuben Becker, Doris Blasenheim, Rose Deckel-Blutt, Herman Brown, Ruth Brown, Frank Decker, Samuel Diner, Barnett Elkin, Jesse Epstein, Irving Fisher, Henry Friedlander, Irving Ginsberg, Hazel Greenspan, Louis Kaplan, Lois Nash Cowder, Leo Kelmanson, Ruth Kelmanson, Jack Kurtzman, Romana Koplovich, Lawrence Kopp, Goldie Leifer, Hilda Lutsky, Max Matlis, Sanford Matloff, Sarah Meyer, Seki Rice, Lillian Rosenthal, Samuel Shockett, Morris Tanzer, Fanny Weinstein, Benjamin Weiss, and David Roth. Is there anyone else who's here this evening and we didn't mention a name that would like to mention a name? Beautiful meal. Thank you. Beautiful. We'll rise in solidarity as we remember all of our loved ones and join together to offer the Kaddish on page 598. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, be'alma divra chirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayichon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayei d'chol Beit Yisrael, b'agalav v'zman kariv v'imru Amen. Yehei shemei Rabbah mevarach le'alam le'almei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yit'aleh v'yitalal shemei d'kudsha b'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata da'amiran be'alma v'imru Amen. Yehei shalama Rabbah min shemaya v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen. Oseh shalom b'imramav hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen. Zichronam livracha, may every one of their memories be for a blessing.
Amen.
Okay, please be seated. Okay, again, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Some important announcements. First is, of course, to join us for our Shabbat services tomorrow morning, streaming live at 9:30. You can also join us here in person, just in the chapel right behind us. Again, the live streaming versions will be available on our website, YouTube, and Facebook pages as well. Also, tomorrow, being the first Shabbat of the month, we'll have our wonderful Women's Torah commentary. This month will be facilitated by Leah Oppenheimer and Rebecca Samet. Again, that's 12 o'clock on Zoom, and all are welcome to join us. Reminder again that Erev Rosh Hashanah services begin this Monday evening at 7 o'clock. A reminder again that they will be virtual as they were last year, with a handful of people, very, very small number of people, just to help us with the honors and aliyahs as we move through the holidays itself. And of course, Cantor and myself and Kirsten, our accompanist, who will be here. So again, all of our services can be found on our website, on YouTube, on Facebook. And so Erev services will be Monday night at 7, first day Rosh Hashanah services beginning at 10 o'clock. And then second day, the same thing, except the following day on Wednesday. Also a reminder that we have a family service, we hope weather permitting, on the first day of Rosh Hashanah at 3 o'clock, which will be right outside in the front. We do need, though, pre-registration. We need to just make sure we know who's coming and to do it as safely as we possibly can. All that information should be on our website. And we welcome everybody to Tashlich, the wonderful service that we do at Havens Beach, which is just down the street from here. If you don't know how to find it, let me know. Again, it'll be 4:15-ish on the first day of Rosh Hashanah if the weather is allowing. And from what I can tell so far, it looks like it's going to be a beautiful day. So again, come on out, bring people. That one we can all be there and all be there safely. So please bring yourselves, bring your friends. It's really one of the highlights of the holiday season for all of us, and certainly will be a lot more fun than virtual Tashlich last year, which was near absurd. Reminder also, of course, Yom Kippur coming up the following week, Shabbat Shuvah in between. All of our information about the holidays, at least, should be on our website. And just a reminder to those members of the community, if you would like to come by and pick up a copy of our Machzor so that you have one at home while you're watching, you can come by either on Sunday from 4:30 to 5:30 right out in the front, or on Monday morning from 9:30 to 10:30. In addition to that, we're going to give out some round challahs, calendars, yahrzeit candles, and also, very importantly, shopping bags with a list already to participate in our hygiene products drive for the food pantry. This year, the food pantry really specifically asked for personal hygiene products more than food. So you'll get a bag, you can fill it up, bring it back anytime during the high holiday period of time, and of course, it'll be very appreciated. I think, just a reminder again that on Thursday at 6 o'clock, the wonderful series of classes that our member Alan Levin has been teaching called Transformation and Renewal. This one will be a reflection on Yom Kippur. This is open to everybody, regardless of background. It's just a great class to get ourselves prepared for Yom Kippur. Beyond that, if you have any questions, if anything wasn't clear about the holidays or anything else going on, ask Neil. But otherwise, you can come find me. Yes? Oh, Jason, happy birthday to you. Yom Huledet Sameach. We love celebrating birthdays around here. A couple of years ago, we would have given you a cake, but come back in a couple of years, when we're back at the temple, we'll give you that cake and come back and celebrate your birthday. But many, many happy returns in Shabbat Shalom to that. That's great. We love that around here. That is for sure. So I think I've covered all my bases. Cantor, we can have a closing song and then we'll do Kiddush. Sound good? What do you got in mind?
Same thing.
Good. Same thing works for me. That's good.
Oh, Shalom Roma, Uyase Shalom Aleinu, Ve'al Kol Yisrael, Ve'imru, Amen. Yase Shalom, Shalom Aleinu, Ve'al Kol Yisrael, Yase Shalom, Shalom Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael.
We'll rise as we turn to page 123 for Kiddush. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam b'horei peri hagafen. That's the Amen part. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'ratza b'hanu v'shabbat chodsho b'ahabahu v'ratzon inchilhanu zikaron lemahaseh v'reishit ki hu yom tefila v'mikra'e kodesh zecher l'tziat mitzrayim ki v'hanu v'acharta ve'otanu kidashta mikol ha'amim V'shabbat kodshecha Ve'ahava uvratzon hinchaltanu. Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh HaShabbat. Amen. L'chaim and l'shana tova to all of you. Shabbat shalom. Thanks so much for coming. All right. Yes, talks were also bad because people were throwing away medals. So what I did last year for the virtual thing, which you know, I did, it seemed like a good idea, was just like go to the beach, like write a word down on a thing and let the I like that too, but some people are still going to throw bread in. I promise. Sure, no, actually, it's really not so bad. It's really not so bad. Yeah, no, you'll exactly. You know, but basically, so Nicola would be a good one because you know Salon next to C is probably solid. I'll send you the other one is maybe it's I think that's one of them. Yeah, but again, like all of your priorities over the next several years. The main thing that I now a little worried about is like I still have to find all the reminders. That's the thing in my office. Anything. Anything you need, I'll like my office. You can. That's also totally like whatever you want to do. Like your time is whenever you want it. The only thing about Sundays here, I just don't know is sort of like what's going on in the building. But yeah, that's what I'm saying. It shouldn't have any effect on anything at all. And I just remind you to give you the way to open the computer, and then I should be fine. Okay, that's good. And maybe what we'll do is I can just leave it on. That way, like if you come in on Sunday. Right. So I will spend the time tomorrow and find all of those things, God willing. Hey guys, how are you? Happy birthday! I know it is. It's. My mom says hi. My mom says hi. Oh, I love her. So what are you doing for the birthday? You got a big birthday.